What we're doing today. I sent you an email this morning, and I'm going to talk to you because, again, outside of Grace, hi Grace, it's just going to be you today. I sent you an email this morning. It's around 8 o'clock. You open that up. What you were looking at. Basically, today I want to start the conversation about proposals. It's due at the end of this week, a proposal from everyone, and I thought, what better way to do that than to write one. So what's in your inbox? It's a little longer, first of all, than maybe what you guys will give me, which is fine. The other note I would give you is I wrote it. And what I always like to point out is you guys write like you, I write like me. You do not have to try to write like me. I've written a lot more than you, so I should be better at it. But anyway, what this is, it's a proposal, if I were in the class, about Die Hard. Of course, we're not writing about Die Hard. All I want you to do, to begin with, read over this. It's going to look a little long, but it goes fast. Read over this, the whole thing, and then go back and read the first paragraph. And we're going to talk about it paragraph by paragraph. Sound good? All right, take a couple minutes. So, in this first paragraph, what do we end up talking about? We have a couple ideas. We have a question or two. Like what's the big question at the start of the paragraph? I guess we'll start there.
Talking about if Die Hard is a Christmas movie or not.
What do you think?
I think that it's an action movie set in a Christmas time. I agree with the modern retelling of Christmas story.
So you think it is? You do think it's a Christmas movie then?
Not really.
Why not?
If there's an action movie set in the rainforest, does it make it a rainforest movie?
To be fair, I don't know that we have a rainforest genre. You know what I mean?
But
yeah.
it doesn't make it a Halloween movie or anything.
Sure. Okay, that's a little bit better. Yeah, and you've kind of we actually got the same argument in the last class. And basically, what both of you were saying is it's an action movie, which it absolutely is, with this like veneer of Christmas over the top. It's set during Christmas, so there's going to be Christmas things coming up, but that doesn't make it a Christmas movie. I think what can also help us here, can you think of like one or two, like if you think Christmas movie, what would you go to?
The Grinch.
Okay.
Essentially.
Yeah, pretty standard. Christmas setting, of course, but then also pretty deeply woven into like what Christmas is, how it works, or whatever. Yeah. Other examples I could think of, like there's that awful Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer that's like an hour long. Like no one remembers that because you watch it when you're a kid, but my kids have discovered it on YouTube. It's an hour long and it's awful. The claymation thing, it's terrible. Frosty. Somebody in the last class said The Santa Claus. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Santa Claus dies at the beginning, and Tim Allen, the main character. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah. And he becomes Santa Claus. Yeah. So those are sort of a part of that genre in the way that we would talk about it. And you'll see this debate online legit every year. Die Hard will come back around. Different channels will show it or whatever, and people debate whether or not it's a Christmas movie. And that's honestly a big part of the reason I taught it in this class, because I was thinking about that question. And what's interesting to me, to begin with, isn't whether or not it is a Christmas movie. I happen to think it is, but the fact that anyone cares. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, people legit get upset with each other about this, and that to me says, well, whatever that question is really about must matter a pretty great deal. And so there's got to be something there. There's got to be something in the movie that interests people, that says something about us, like we keep talking about. And so that's what got me going. Now, for the rest of the paragraph, the ideas we come to, I would say, stem from that question. But I'm going to ask you first, can you find any sort of big ideas or maybe even just the beginnings of arguments here in this first paragraph?
McClane is at the bottom of the food chain and how he's an everyman.
Yeah, you would have to prove that. And, well, we'll talk about that at the end of this. But yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of the movie, is that McClane as a character is this everyman. Here we call him a foil to Hans Gruber. Hans Gruber is not an everyman, right? He's very different in some important ways. Anything else? Probably one other thing in here.
About him going to LA to reunite with his family and children.
Good. Yeah, and again, that to me, by the way, is what makes it a Christmas movie. We'll back to that in a second. The two big ideas that come from that question, is it a Christmas movie? When I'm thinking about it in the proposal, I happen to think it is, and I'm trying to think about why that is. Well, number one, he's an everyman, which is super typical of the genre. And he's trying to save his family, which is also very typical of the genre. And it manifests in different ways. But like in The Grinch, he's not an everyman, right? He's an anti-hero. But he's still at the bottom of the food chain. He's an outcast. And what does he do at the end? Well, he finds a family. He feels included, right? Rudolph is exactly the same way as the Grinch. He's an outcast. He finds a family in the end. The Santa Claus, I love this example. I don't know how well you remember the movie. I was raised by the television. But
Pretty well.
okay, so Santa dies at the beginning. Tim Allen, the main character, I don't remember his actual name in the movie, is a divorced dad who is just doing his best and discovers this guy, gets cursed, becomes Santa Claus. If the only point to the movie was Christmas, like capital C, this is what we're talking about, it would be about half as long, because he figures out about halfway through how to be Santa Claus, right? So that's not really what the movie is about. In the end, it's about family. He figures out how to be okay with his ex-wife and her new husband, and even though the family is different, because it's like, I think it came out in the 90s, even though their family isn't traditional in the way that we think about it, it can still be a family. They can still make it work, right? That's what the movie is about. And to me, the point I'm trying to make here is, I think that's what the genre is about. Every time, no matter what the parameters, those are going to be a little bit different, but every time it's about finding or rebuilding or unifying a family in this way, and sort of saying, like, that's what Christmas is really about, right? Like, that's the message in all these movies. So what I'm beginning to say here is, when I'm trying to answer that question in the proposal, he's an everyman, he's at the bottom, right? He doesn't even have shoes. And he's fighting literally, but we're going to start to argue figuratively, to save his family, right? Again, in that very Christmas genre sort of way. And yeah. All right. So that's what we accomplished in the first paragraph. Go ahead and read the second one. We're going to do the same thing. So what do we have here? We kind of elaborate on those ideas, right? What are some of the maybe more specific points we start to make, do you think?
Talking about how McClane kind of accepts his wife to be growing stronger.
Uh-huh.
We talk about that and address that, and then we talk about Gruber's fixation on wealth.
His Scroogean fixate. How often do you understand what that's saying?
Scrooge.
See, he is Scrooge, right? What does the Scrooge character do? What's their role?
Well, he was focused on wealth and...
He's just greedy. He's just fucking greedy. That's his motivation. He's the embodiment of it. In the original, we're talking about A Christmas Carol, right? That's his problem. And again, if we're saying the genre works how it always works, he's an anti-hero in the film because he's a douche at the beginning, because he's motivated by greed. But that also makes him an outcast. What happens in the end? He finds a family, right? He gets rid of the greed. He gives away some of his money. He's not motivated by that anymore. He's learned his lesson. And he sort of throws his arms around sort of Tiny Tim and those other people, right? But in this case, we just make him the villain. Hans Gruber. Think about, and I should point this out, this is a proposal of a paper, so some parts of it are going to be necessarily vague, right? We can't like dive into anything in a lot of detail. But some scenes I might look at if I were going to talk about Gruber as the embodiment of greed almost anything he does, but like when you learn, for instance, that they're not really kidnapping these people because they have like ideals, they're kidnapping them because they're thieves, or when they open the vault and you don't even see what's in the vault. There's this yellow light over Hans Gruber, and they're playing. I think it's Joy to the World. I can't remember right now, but they're playing. I get some kind of like Christmas music, some like Christ Christmas music, like religious Christmas music. I think it's purposeful. Again, this is his religion, right? Like this is everything he lives for. Is money, is greed. And again, he's made the villain, so everything that he is what McClane is not. McClane's not greedy. He's motivated by something else. He's not interested in any of that stuff, right? And so how does that figure into, I say at some point in here that we'll do both. He literally saves his family. How does he do that? That should be pretty easy.
He kills Hans, and he kills all the others.
And he saves Holly. You kind of need your wife to have your family, like, according to the traditional. Yeah, okay. Now, figuratively is harder. That's where we'd have to make an argument, right? How does he? Do you know? I'm going to grill you a little bit.
How does he save his family?
Figuratively. Because in the end, like, think about it. At the beginning, they start out, they're very separate. They're separated by the entire United States. And in the end, they ride off. They kiss in the back of a limousine. Seems like it's going to be okay, right? What happens over the course of the movie to do that, right? Like to prompt that, do you think?
In the beginning of the movie, he had a lot of problems with Holly being more independent from him, and I think towards the end of the movie, like throughout the movie, he kind of accepted that more, and he's the reason basically that they were separated, and so whenever he accepted that, they came back together.
Well, now here's my question. I do not disagree with you. But if we were to write this paper, which we are not, right? We're not writing about Die Hard. But if we were, we would have to point to something in the movie that helps us argue that he accepts, like her view of marriage or something. We need some piece of evidence. Can you think of any? Because I can think of two, but I'm gonna try to make you do it first.
In the beginning, whenever they were talking in the office,
Okay.
it was mostly her talking about wanting to get back together and how much she missed him.
Right.
But it was him who initiated like all the touchy-feely stuff at the end of the movie. So maybe that shows how he's not so withdrawn from her anymore.
That could be a start. And I mean, I'm honestly not remembering who initiates the touchy-feely stuff, but fair enough. I do think wherever we go, it's going to have to be near the ending because they're separate, again, literally, in much of the way that they're separate figuratively, they're separate throughout the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
So it can only be really at the end when they reunite. Can you think of anything that happens between the two of them or involving the two of them that might help us think of, like, did anything stand out to you? It's like 2 or 3 scenes at the end that they're together.
Herself like she makes sure that they never lost him as McClane.
That's interesting. So that tells you that she has accepted him back, but it's also weird because again we spent really all last week talking about how she's independent, right? Financially, but also I don't even know. I don't have a word for this, but like she's independent in the world, right? She doesn't really need it. She wants a relationship with him, but she does not need it. And again, in the beginning of the movie, that's a problem for him. That's a big problem. In the end, something has happened. Either by taking his last name, you could try to argue that she just says, well, I wanted all that, but oh well, And it's like, maybe. But on the other hand, that feels too neat, right? Like, that the movie is just about, look at this macho guy, he saves this lady, and now she's just going to fawn over him, right? Like, the movie is so different in so many other ways from all these action movies, I just don't know why they would revert, right? So here's the 2 things I'm thinking. First of all, you have a good radar. I would go back to that scene, like if you were writing this paper, which again you are not, but if you were, that's a good idea. She does say McClane. That's wild. I'm going to go rewatch that and see if there's anything else. In that scene, right before she says McClane, if you remember, she says it, she corrects him. McClane is introducing her to Al, because they haven't met either, but now, you know, they're buddies. They went through a thing, even though they did it via walkie-talkie. He's introducing her to Al, like, hey, this is my friend, this is my wife. You know, there's still that weird thing between them. And he goes to say Holly Gennaro. She corrects him. She says McClane. That's interesting. He could not do that at the beginning of the movie. He could not accept, right? When he sees it on the screen, he gets pissed off. They fight about it. He couldn't accept it. In the end, you see that he has. In that moment, she sees that he has. So again, you could argue that all she wanted was him accepting the idea that she could be independent. That she could, again, like we talked about kind of last week, it's not a question of, because some people could read that independence as like she wants power in the relationship, but rather, especially in that last scene, she just wants recognition. She wants like the ability to be her own person, but she doesn't necessarily always have to be. I mean, phrasing would be weird, but basically she wants to be equal, right? And him doing that, basically signaling to her, if you want to be Gennaro for the rest of your life, I mean, that's what we're doing, okay? Signals to her that they can be, you know, more equal. That's what she wants. That'd be the first thing I would think about. So you're at the right scene. Very good. The other thing I would think about, a couple of things you have to grapple with. If you remember, and you may not, I've seen the movie a lot more than you, probably. But in that last scene when McClane saves Holly, right? The building's all blown up. There's fire everywhere randomly, and like, you know, things aren't going great. When he goes to save Holly, did she look, if you can sort of draw a mental picture, she look different at all to you in that scene in any kind of way that stands out? Okay. Because we're going to have to keep using our memory today because we won't have time to like go to all these scenes. She's disheveled, because everything is, but that disheveling allows for her shirt is more open.
Oh yeah, it's unbuttoned.
Or all of a sudden in the movie she has breasts, right? I'm telling you, that's intentional. She's a damsel in distress in that last scene. Easily. We're announcing her femininity physically. She needs saving by a man, literally, right? He shows up like a knight, basically, to get her out of there. Like, he's broken and battered, right? He drags one of his feet in, basically. And he saves her. So again, on the one hand, much like the McClane argument earlier, you could start to make the case, this movie, for all of its like empowered woman and all that stuff, in the end, is just like, nah, fuck all that. We're not gonna empower women. But one interesting thing happens in that scene too. He yells for her, and I think I'm getting this right, to duck. He might just say, I think he just says her name, maybe. But she knows what to do, right? So he initiates it. I mean, that's without question. But she participates in her own saving, right? That's not damsel in distress. So again, it's almost like the movie gives you this traditional setup, like what you expect in a movie like this. Look at how she looks. She's going to have to save her. You know, you guys know how the story goes. And then the movie surprises you when she manages to sort of get out of the way for a second, surprises Hans as well. And then, of course, what happens, right? So in those two small moments, right at the end of the movie, he allows her, and I don't really, I mean, you might quibble with that verb, but he asks her something to participate, right? That's what she couldn't have in the beginning. So that moment, and then the moment when he says Gennaro, tells her, okay, he's finally like willing to let me be my own person if I want to, let me participate, let me have a say. So you get the sense in those two moments, because that's all you really get. They're not together otherwise. That he's gonna give this new kind of 80s marriage a go, right? That's how you would start to make that argument. Two more things I'll say to you. Then we gotta move on. The first is a bit of trivia. I'm gonna tell every class this apparently. So in that last scene when Hans Gruber falls, and you use an up-close shot of his face, great acting from Alan Rickman, right? Like the terror on his face. Two things I love about that scene, behind the scenes stuff. Number one, they actually drop Alan Rickman like 25 feet. And this was planned. I mean, it wasn't like, they told him, we're gonna drop you, there's a huge mat thing that he falls into, like a stunt thing, okay? 25 feet is a long way. It is terrifying. I don't care who you are, right? But here's my favorite part. They tell him, we're gonna drop you on 3. 1, 2, 3, we're gonna drop you, we're gonna film that. They drop him on 2. So the terror on his face is real. And he was furious. But I bring that up because I actually want to talk about that scene. And again, you have to use your memory, and I am sorry. I believe it was you last week that told me you didn't watch it the most carefully or something.
I already watched it.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Well, good on you. Well, then you may remember this. When Hans has Holly, right, and he's hanging out the window, how do they get him off her?
He's handcuffed to her, and they just have to, like, pull it off her wrist. Isn't that what he did?
What do there's something on her wrist.
No, they were handcuffed together. Weren't they?
They have to take something off of her. It's not a handcuff.
Is it
It's a watch.
Yeah, it was something.
Well, I say this because, again, the filmmakers, like, super close up on the watch, want you to see the watch when they take it off, when that's what, like, I want to say, if I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure when he falls, he's holding it. Like, he's left holding it when he falls. Do you happen to recall what that watch is about?
Was it a Rolex watch that she got for being so good at the company?
She gets it from that world. It's a representation of this corporate world that's motivated by capitalism and power. Hans is much more like that world. It's kind of interesting that he ends up with it as he's falling to his death, right? It's also interesting that for her to, you could argue, reconcile her marriage and sort of reunify this nuclear family, that she has to throw that off, right? So now she's not gonna just, perhaps, again, you have to kind of dig into this in a paper, but she's not gonna just be motivated by these sort of corporate capitalist ideals. Basically, they're both giving ground in the end. He's gonna ask her to participate more. She's not gonna be maybe completely career driven, right? There's gonna be like a compromise. And it's the watch there. That's a body paragraph about a watch and why we're focused on it and what it is for Holly, right? Okay. Read the last paragraph. So if you could try, and I understand it's a lot, but if you could try to sort of sum up what we're talking about here, how would you attempt to do that? Yeah, whatever. I don't know. 5 sentences. I don't care.
This last paragraph talks about how nobody.
Start small. Like we kind of open with Gruber, right? What are we saying about him?
It says that he all our anxiety during the criminalization of all the base.
What's your understanding of that? Like basically we're saying he's the villain because what?
Greed.
Yeah. So again, like in the classic story, A Christmas Carol, we redeem the guy who's greedy. Here, what we're kind of arguing is we're so worried as a culture that we're more like him that we have to make him the villain. And we can't even allow him to be American, right? He's foreign. He's different from us. Like, we're not like him. Yeah. So that's part one of the kind of argument here. Good. What else?
We talk about how McClane is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Because he's an everyman,
Yeah.
and he stands for the values of what Christmas is supposed we see ourselves as.
Right, what we would want to see ourselves as. We're everymen. Most people watching the movie don't have like power in the same way that Gruber does, that a lot of these other people in the movie do. Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, and we kind of glossed this at the beginning, we basically say the whole world is against McClane. What's your sense of that? Do you have a sense of that in the movie? What?
The cops didn't listen to anything he had to say.
Yeah.
And they almost killed him because of that.
Yeah. FBI as well.
The FBI as well. All the henchmen people wanted to do the same.
Right. And that's kind of their job, to be fair.
Yeah.
But.
That guy, I don't remember his name, but he gets killed because he thought that he knew better than his friend.
Ellis. That guy. Yeah. Yeah. The only person I can think of that you're leaving out is the reporter as well.
The ones that went to his house, and they're the reason that Holly got caught.
They are. They almost get his wife killed. And again, what motivates all those people that seem to be against McClane, to me, I mean, sometimes it's greed and whatever, but it's power, right? So much in the movie is about power and who has it and who wants it.
I feel like it's self-righteousness too. They're just willing to step on others to get to what they want and what will protect them.
Well, and again, that's power, right? Like you're talking to step on someone means you have power over them. Capitalism, we call it that because it's about capitalizing upon others, right? You take advantage of other people. That's what capitalism is. And again, the reason, I gotta take a step back for a second and then we'll come back up. The reason these movies, these stories, to take it all the way back to Charles Dickens, that's who wrote A Christmas Carol, for over 100 years have been talking about trying to convince us that we're not really that greedy, right? Is because, think about Christmas, right? I mean, I don't know how your families do it, but I know how TV depicts it. I know like all the commercials we're gonna encounter, all the sales, all the people get crushed to death every year at Black Friday. You know what I'm saying? Like for an Xbox or whatever. So we very much have the end of the Grinch, to borrow your example, where they lose all the presents and they're like, well, that's not what mattered, right? Like that's one of the best illustrations of that idea. But here you have all these people that either want wealth like Gruber or even more basically want power. The FBI guys, the cops, the reporter. He doesn't care about the family. He doesn't care, like he goes to see these kids and he basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, but like I want to say he says something like, if you could never, like
if you never see your parents again.
Something like that, yeah. And it's like, Jesus Christ, man.
And he threatens the nanny with getting deported.
Yeah. Because he just wants the story. He doesn't give a shit about anybody else. So he's just like, in a way, Gruber, right? He just wants advancement. He just wants power or maybe money that comes, prestige that comes with being promoted, blah, blah, blah. All these other figures seem to have power in this situation. And McClane, when we say he's at the bottom of the pole in terms of being an everyman, he doesn't have that power. He can't sort of dictate terms to anyone. He only has power over himself and his very sort of, I'm having trouble with words today, his very nearby surroundings, right? Like that's all the power he has. But again, part of the message seems to be that's all the power he needs, right? Okay. So we have Gruber and we have McClane and what McClane stands for as an everyman. And then we go to that business about Holly, right? And we've talked about this. She says she's going to take his name. And we talked about like how that isn't necessarily just saying she's not going to be an independent woman. And that's where the question of whether or not this is a Christmas movie got us, basically. It starts very silly. I do not want a paper where you try to convince me that some movie you saw is like a Halloween movie or not. Like, that's not what we're doing, right? But if you start with something like that, part of the point here is you can start there, and if you think about, well, what makes it a Christmas movie? It goes all the way back, according to this argument, to the first paragraph. It's about an everyman who fights all these entities that want to get in his way, that stand between him and the reunification of his family. That's it. And it also happens to be set at Christmas. That's what makes it a Christmas movie. Now, the differences from that genre are what I would argue make it an 80s Christmas movie. But look at where this got us. I mean, I'm gonna translate my attempt at a thesis for you real quick. The 80s marital roles were changing. That's pretty easy. Holiday stories, which are all about family, which traditionally includes marriage, has to change as a result, right? That's pretty easy. McClane doesn't just beat Gruber, he beats what Gruber stands for. Christmas and America by association, because we've kind of, as a country, taken on Christmas especially as like our holiday, you know, is not about wealth, which is what we're worried about. That idea is completely foreign, and I phrase it that way on purpose, again, because we make Gruber foreign. Like, that's a foreign idea. We're not like that. What we value is what McClane values. Everything that comes along with that, like gender roles, have to change too, right? They have to get updated too, because we're like McClane and we value family. And if that's what we got to do, that's what we'll do, like he does. So at this point, that's what I'm going to do in the paper. I have a couple really quick nods to some scenes. Obviously, I would go look for some more. I would go watch them again. I would take notes. I would think about body paragraphs. But this is what this would be my approach if I were to write a paper about Die Hard, right? And that's what I'm asking you guys to do in your proposals. They don't have to be this developed. They can be if you want it to be. But really thinking about your text, whatever it is, and what makes your text your text. Here's what I mean by that. We're going to do a quick exercise. So I've spent most of this class talking about how Die Hard is a Christmas movie, because I think it is, and you're free to disagree, but I think it is. But we haven't talked about an even easier thing, which is how is Die Hard an 80s action movie? And you may not have seen as many 80s action movies as I have. That's quite all right. Just go with action movie, because they haven't changed very much. When you watch a movie like Die Hard, somebody's like, that's an action movie. You're like, yeah. Why? What are some of the reasons?
The guns, the fighting, and...
Fighting I'll lump in with like murder.
Yeah.
Just fighting and killing, and yeah. Anything else?
There's a lot of toxic and forced masculinity all through those movies.
Yeah. That's true. And Die Hard has its fair share of it. So, a more helpful term might be, and I think I use it in the proposal, but hyper-masculinity. Because especially in 2020, a lot of you guys are really quick to talk about toxic masculinity, and it is in the film, but I think the film is much more concerned with just elevated, like, people are trying too hard at times, but I don't know that it always gets toxic, you know what I'm saying? It's like, but yeah, that's absolutely in those. I can think of two more. Do you have any more?
Greed is a lot of the times why
That's true.
they have to fight.
It's all about power.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about someone dominating someone else. Now, sometimes that's in terms of wealth, right? Like it is in this one. But even when it's clear Gruber's not going to get his money, right? Like it's literally flying out the window on fire. He still wants to kill this guy and his wife, right? Like, so in the end, you could say, well, once that's taken out,
Dignity?
do what?
Dignity?
Why do you say that?
He's fighting for his dignity. He wants to get the person that took away what he has dedicated his life for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would kind of lump that in here, but either way, yeah, it's about if we end up talking about dignity in some way, it's about showing this guy McClane that like he's not gonna win here. He's not gonna one up me or whatever, right? Sure. All right. So the other two. And you can kind of lump this in with guns, but you know it is different enough. We have explosions. We get a couple, and we also get breasts. This is all over the genre, especially in the 80s. There's a lot of them. All right. So there's a couple ways to approach this, but to start with just this list, you would not, right, write me a paper where you're like, here's why Die Hard is an 80s action movie. because, duh, right? But if you were to write Die Hard as a Christmas movie, the reason for that are all the ways that Die Hard is sort of atypical of this genre, right? And maybe more typical of Christmas. And the two that I gave you were, he's an everyman, and you can say he's like opposed to greed in some way, which he is. Have you ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? Probably not.
Not that I can remember.
Grace, have you ever seen it?
Mm-hmm.
Really good movie. I talk about Frank Capra. He's the guy that made it. You've heard of it? Okay, it's very famous. It's black and white. It comes on at the holidays. Anyway, same story. Every man, he owes so much money at the beginning of the movie, he's going to kill himself. Like literally. And then an angel shows up and stops him, and he has, in a way, a kind of Christmas Carol look at his life, like if he kills himself, and he sees what it's going to do to people around him, and so he changes, right? And again, in the end, you have the unification of the family, because they need the dad, right? And there's more to it than that. I don't want to spoil the movie, but like basically that's how it works. That's how this movie works too. But you notice, that makes it sound way more like It's a Wonderful Life than it does, you know, any of the Van Damme flicks or any of that, right? So it's kind of interesting if I'm going to talk about this stuff that sets it apart from all the other stuff that you expect when you see a movie like Die Hard. We shouldn't write our papers, whatever text it is, about what we expect. At least that shouldn't be all you write about. It's going to be very boring. It's going to be very banal. There's hyper-masculine, you know, folks walking around in a movie like Die Hard. You're kidding, right? But making a list like that can help us generate this other one. Does that make sense? At this stage, I'm going to ask a little more of you, but at this stage, do you have any questions about this process? Okay. What I want you to do now then, I'll give you a couple of steps. Oh, it's on the back of my paper. Number one, I want you to write down whatever text you're thinking of working with. You may not be 100% on a certain text right now, but I want you to pretend. I want you to take one, okay? Write down the name of that text. I want you to give me a 2 or 3 sentence summary. Doesn't have to be any more than that. Just plot, okay? Stuff we need to know. And then, this will be the hard part. What makes your text your text? It sets it apart in some kind of way. So I'll give you one more example. Do you know who Jennifer Aniston is? Okay. 75% of her movies are rom-coms. How do rom-coms work? Have you ever seen any? You probably have.
Yeah.
We start out with a woman, usually.
Yeah, no, usually. And then normally the movie started off with a woman and she was her friends for some reason always. And then there's this guy that she's forced to be with.
I wouldn't say she's forced. Well,
she's definitely led.
Well, the story leads her there. So like, okay, backtrack a little bit. Usually the woman is with her friends because usually she's had some kind of like problem. Like she lost her job, or she just got out of a long relationship, or, you know, something bad has happened, right? She's down on her luck in some kind of way. And then, so she maybe goes to her friends for that. But then she crosses paths with this guy, like, they make eyes on a subway, or like she's getting off an elevator, and she's like, oh, who's that? And then the doors, like, it's like, will they reconnect a lot of the time? And then at some point they do, but there's something in the way, like her job, or he's a serial killer. That's a joke. That'd be a great rom-com. But like something's in the way. Something keeps them from getting together, and that's how the whole movie. You're like, well, are they gonna make it? And then they do, right? I think a lot of the time, what's pushing them together and forcing, as you described, is the genre. They have to get together. That's how the genre works. There's been a handful of movies where they don't get it together at the end, and audiences are furious because that's what we expect, right? So in a rom-com, that would be like our list over here, like kind of what we're, but if you were to choose one, which people rarely do, and I'm frankly thankful for that, anything that sets it apart from those like assumptions that we already have makes that text, if that makes sense. Okay.
I've only seen one.
You've probably seen more, but
No, it's How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and it
Yeah.
didn't follow along any of that.
yeah. Well, that one's super different. So again, like the fact that it is so different, I haven't seen that one, but I do know of it. A lot of movies we're talking about today, that one I think came out when I was working at Blockbuster. I would guarantee it at least capitalizes upon some of our expectations. Like a movie like that, even just from the title, knows, I'm pointing at 80s action, but like pretend this is our rom-com list, knows you're going to go into a movie like that knowing how the genre works. And so anytime it flips it on its head, it's taking advantage of the fact that you thought it would be different, right? You thought something else would happen, and it's like, oh no, we're going to change it, here's how. And that says something about us. I'm talking at you a lot. What I want you to try, like I said, your text, whatever it is, a 2-3 sentence summary, and then to the best of your ability, could be a short list, we have a short list. What makes your text specifically? Just take a couple minutes. We'll talk about it. What'd you come up with?
I chose Wild Hogs.
Wild Hogs.
Have you ever seen that?
I know of it. It's like old guys on motorcycles.
It's 4 men. There's John Travolta and Tim Allen and
Old guys on motorcycles, though.
Kind of.
That's what it is. I can picture. Look, I hate that I keep saying this today. I honestly do. I worked at Blockbuster. I can picture the box art. Like, it's old guys on motorcycles. That's what it is. They had another movie like that around the same time. I think it's called Old Cowboys. It was about old guys in space, and it was oh shit, what's his name? He's an Old Country for Old Men, but you guys have you guys ever seen The First Minute? Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones is in, and Clint Eastwood, and a bunch of other old guys in space. It's accurate. Anyway, who else is in the movie?
There's Tim Allen, Martin Lawrence, John Travolta, and he's right here, but it doesn't say his name.
Oh, that doesn't bode well. You click on
William H. Macy.
William H. Macy. He's good.
His name was Dudley in the film.
Sure. He's really good. He's a really good actor. Okay. What's our summary of the movie?
4 middle-aged men who
Right.
attempt to recapture their youth and reestablish their masculinity go on an adventure on motorcycles and end up sacrificing their manliness as a means of them continuing living.
We're gonna have to spoil the movie a little bit. How do they sacrifice their masculinity?
Have you seen the movie? Yeah. Okay. Well, at the end, they were stuck in this little town,
Okay.
and basically they blew up a biker bar.
Oh, they're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and the bikers come after them, and
Right.
Dudley gets duct taped and stuck on a rope, and he's like hung, and they all basically have to sacrifice their dignity to save him. That's how I read movies.
How do they do that?
Well, they were holed up, and then they kind of just had to come out and lay at their feet.
They beg?
They begged him, and then they kind of had to fight 4 against like 60.
And they win?
No, somebody else had to step in and stop it.
Who steps in? Cops?
The head of the biker gang, his mentor, stepdad, something like that. It doesn't clarify.
Why does he stop it?
It doesn't really.
There has to be.
It doesn't.
There has to be a reason. Okay, we'll table that for a minute. There has to be a reason. But what sets your film apart from others like it?
I said the men.
It's called Space Cowboys, by the way. Sorry. Go ahead.
I said the men do not all find change that they were looking for. John Travolta's character is still miserably divorced from a model. Doug still has health issues. Dudley is still a nerd who doesn't find what he wants. And unlike most action movies, the guy does not always get what he wanted when he begins his journey.
What I would say, I mean, there's some action in it, but to me it sounds more like a quest narrative, like a journey story. Especially,
I don't know what to call it.
you're good. No, but especially You ever heard of the movie Easy Rider? You have?
I've heard of it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, no one. I haven't even seen it, to be honest with you. But super famous. I can think of some examples you might be familiar with. Has either one of you ever seen Homeward Bound? You guys haven't seen Homeward Bound?
Dogs?
Yeah. And the one cat, her name is Sassy, because she's sassy.
I've seen it, but I don't remember it.
We had different childhoods. Anyway, I mean, we grew up during different times, is what I'm saying. But okay, well, I hope you guys seen that one. Anyway, quest narrative, in a sense, because the whole movie, I'm guessing, for the most part, they're on the road, right? Like they end up at this biker bar, and that's like the climax. But most of it is them on a journey and kind of hijinks along the way, right? They kind of learn about themselves. No, they go right to the biker bar.
Well, they skinny dip first, but
That's the whole movie. Is an hour.
basically they skinny dip, they go to the bar, and then they find themselves in a town where they almost get killed.
So they never go anywhere.
I mean, just ripping the roads on motorcycles, but that's about
Just
it.
what happened?
Just riding around on motorcycles.
But they just ride around the town. They don't like go like a distance.
It doesn't really specify where they go.
I mean, they go a distance, but like I don't know where they start and finish at.
Yeah,
It just shows them like driving on the road.
it's so non-specific.
Okay. Well, I mean, even that's interesting. But you could argue that part of that is maybe because, and this is a cliche, but it's the journey that matters, right? Like not the destination. That's a hallmark of that genre. What I would hazard that the reason whichever character proposes the trip, it's usually one, and like they have to convince the other guys, right? But they propose it as like, we're gonna hit the road. What?
It was like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're gonna hit the road, gonna kind of man up, and but also share in their masculinity, like as a group, right? And kind of, it's the journey that's gonna help them do that. They're gonna bond as they go, and grow together, but also grow individually as a result. Like that's the whole goal of what they propose. Super standard. It is interesting. So they never lay out a destination. They're just gonna drive for a while and then at some point come back, I guess. Okay. How do they end up at the bar? They just end up in a town?
They just find one, and then they steal his bike, and so he blows up the bar by accident.
Yeah. Okay. I assumed that it was an accident. But what were they trying to do when they blew it up? Like I get they were trying to get him back somehow, right?
Well, they stole the bike, cut fuel lines, and then somebody dropped a cigarette.
Oh, so it's not even them that does it.
No, but the people don't care.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's their fault.
Yeah.
But okay. Well, I kind of wonder. Yeah, part of what the movie seems to be doing. The whole point of this exercise is just so you can borrow my brain, by the way. Part of what it seems like the movie is doing is it's very clearly arguing, like explicitly almost, that what they were driving toward on their journey, literally but also figuratively, is this biker bar and like what it represents. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's almost like the narrative kind of smacks them in the mouth and says, "This is what you wanted. You wanted to be men. You wanted to be like these guys, right?" And then when they get there and they have to sort of reconcile with that, they realize, oh, we didn't want this. We don't want this at all, right? That's something you would have to think about, like what it is they thought they were heading toward versus maybe what they really arrive at, like what that difference is, and then of course why they don't like that difference. You say they end up how they started. That can't be true. Like they're at least happier, right, or something? And I'm asking you, but Grace, you can, because you've seen it. I have not, unfortunately, seen Wild Hogs.
Bobby stood up to his wife,
Okay.
but Woody, which is John Travolta's character, he didn't really get anything. Like I didn't see a bit of it at all.
Well, how does it end? Like, what's the last scene?
They're driving out of the town. Some of them.
Or someone die or something?
No, some of them stayed. Dudley stayed.
Because he's gonna be in the gang.
It's kind of a movie you gotta watch.
I don't remember the ending, I'm gonna be honest. I don't remember the ending.
I've always assumed this, but I'm gonna assume part of the reason you don't remember it is because you saw it a long time ago. But the other part of the reason is it's a piece of shit. That's my assumption. That's always been that's why I've never seen it. It's a stupid premise for a movie. If you have trouble remembering it, another way of talking about this is saying it's not memorable. That usually means it's a piece of shit. But that's fine. Somebody in my last class is gonna write about snakes on a plane. That's a piece of shit movie. You can write it. It's an excellent thing to write about, for sure. I'm guessing, hardcore guessing, something about the ending is meant to, usually in stories like that, you highlight, it's going to sound like a cliche, but it's what you were missing was at home all the time. Like you had it in you the whole time or something, right? Is usually how movies like that go. And whether it's like friendship, like comradeship with each other, or they thought they wanted to be one kind of man when it turns out what they really needed to do, right? The message is that they needed to accept that they were good enough men already, or whatever, right? Like, I'm assuming that the ending does something like that.
It's just a full, like, it's three of them driving off, and
Yeah.
then Dudley's sitting there with Maggie.
Okay, who's Maggie?
Some girl named that with him
Yeah. Well, when's the last time you watched this movie?
last week.
Jesus.
I watched it all through my childhood.
That's so weird. That's both a gift and a curse. So like on the one hand, you know it pretty well, but on the other, you may know it too well. You may be like glossing over details, right? Because you've seen it so many times. I would wager, especially in that bar scene, especially you say this guy shows up and is just like, don't kill him, basically. There has to be a reason. There has to be. If not, then that's legit one of the worst movies ever made. Because as an audience, when you're watching that, you will be upset. You're like, wait, who is this guy and why is he stopping it? It suspends your disbelief. I mean, it no longer suspends your disbelief, right? Like the spell is broken when we have a logical lapse, right, like that. He, I'm guessing, sees something in these guys, he takes pity on them, or you find out something about him. There has to be a reason.
He shows up while they're getting their asses kicked.
Yeah.
And he's like the head biker guy.
Yeah.
And like looks up to him.
Looks up. Oh, the head biker guy looks up to this guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this guy just tells them to not do that because these four guys are fighting 60.
It's breaking the man code. Okay. But then they don't fight one-on-one. They just stop. Well, on some level, you could say that maybe the bikers who are this like hyper-masculine, toxic masculinity, if you like, have like forgotten what they're supposed to be in a way, and this even more traditional masculine guy reminds them. It's interesting. All right, so here's what's interesting. I'm going to try to put it succinctly. These guys go on the road to find what they think is traditional masculinity. And when they find it, it kicks their ass, to borrow your phrasing. But an even more traditional, even more old school masculinity shows up and says, you know, hey, you guys aren't doing it right. Like, you've forgotten some of the rules. And that saves them. So it's almost like, although the film suggests that modern, sort of contemporary ideas of masculinity are often toxic and overblown, by the end, the film suggests that what we need is actually a return to more, like, basically when we think about traditional masculinity as a society, we have the wrong idea. And the question then, when you watch the movie, is why? To put it in a context we could all at least follow, because I'm the only one here who hasn't seen Wild Hogs, apparently. I would hazard that maybe it's a little bit to do with some of the stuff we talked about in Vonnegut and Jarvis, like the kinds of men these four guys think they should be. Why do they think that? They probably think it, and there's got to be something in the movie, like with their conception of masculinity. They think it because of the movies they've seen. They think it because that stuff permeates, again, our culture, right? Our narrative of what a man should be. And so that's what they're operating on. But then when they meet that guy, literally, it's not something they can handle. And then again, when that guy literally meets the guy that they want to be, they find out that they had the story wrong. That, like, I know I'm like spinning here, but I'm trying to put it in a way you can understand. And please bear in mind, I've never seen the fucking movie, but it's like everyone in the movie, except for this one magic guy that shows up at the end, has it wrong. Everyone. That's interesting, right? The film seems to suggest, because we get included in that everyone, that we have it wrong. The question is why, and what do we think it is? Because it's somehow the film is saying that's wrong. We're missing something important. And then this magic fucking character swoops in at the end and sort of points out that, like, we've lost this sense of, like, honor or fairness. But the way you put it, he doesn't have a problem with violence. He's like, yeah, go for it, right? But it's violence without purpose. And for that guy, there has to be a purpose. There has to be a fairness. Otherwise, you know, you're failing somehow. Did any of that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's happening. I'm glad that you at least have, like, some kind of reason. There could be more to it, but that's a pretty good one to begin with. I would look at that. I would revisit the ending. If only, like, I know the last shot is going to be them driving off because you have to show them going home, right? I know that. So let's say 30 seconds or a minute and a half before that. Like, something has to, they're going to say goodbye to Dudley, or they're going to, like, all come back together and say, all right, at least we, you know, Martin Lawrence is going to say something funny because that's his role in the movie, right? Like, there's going to be something.
Bobby's wife comes and finds him and slaps him.
Which one's Bobby? Travolta? Oh, Martin Lawrence.
Martin.
And then you said he stands up to her.
Yeah.
Is it in, like, a condescending way, or is it, like, in a more open sort of, we need to talk and be, like, have a better marriage sort of way?
She's very controlling.
Yeah.
And she has the power in the household.
Yeah.
And
Well,
he
she
kinda-
walks up and slaps him, I mean.
Well, also because only the children listen to her.
Okay. So he's, like, effeminate, I guess, classically speaking? Like, in terms of the power dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Does he take any of that power back in the end?
Yes.
How?
He establishes that he's the man of the house, and he gets the kids to be quiet. Because in the whole beginning, it was them screaming, and he couldn't get them to listen. But
Yeah, I know how that feels. Okay. Yeah, so then the film really does, God, and it came out like in the early 2000s, I'm pretty sure, seem to try to harken back to this sense of, like, real masculinity. But I mean real, I don't mean movies, because when you see the biker bar, look, you said it, I know what it looks like. I've never seen the movie. It's dark, and there's drinking, maybe there's a pool table, there's almost certainly some kind of jukebox. Did I mention smoking? There's guys like, rah, rah, rah. You can't understand anything anyone says when you're walking in. The characters that we're here with are talking, but everyone else is like, ah, and you hear somebody yell, maybe somebody flies through a window. Like, there's this general atmosphere. That's a movie atmosphere, right? It's interesting that the movie wants us to think about our expectations, and then when that guy shows up, it indicts those expectations, but again, not in the way we would expect. What we would expect is that guy to show up and somehow maybe talk the bikers out of it, because it's like, man, you guys are being ridiculous. You think you got to be like these, like, big men? Oh, you're so tough. Like, that's what, if that movie were made in 2020, maybe that would be the case. But for its time period, what it says instead is, you guys aren't being real men. You're being movie men. You're being like, oh, you're being all hard. It's 60 versus 4. Be serious, right? Like, you're not hard. You're just an asshole. You're 60 assholes. And so it's trying to get us as an audience to think about what a real masculinity is, and maybe how we've, like, lost the path and why. Especially in the end. That ending is surprising with Bobby. He's absolutely, like, that's like a 1950s thing to say. I'm the man of the house, and I'm gonna, like, tell the kids what to do, type of thing, right? Because you have a movie in '88, and after this I'll let you go, but we're talking about Die Hard. Die Hard is more progressive than that movie, and it's 20 years older. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's wild. Yeah. Does that help at all? Okay. Like I said, I talked to you a lot. Most of it was me trying to navigate this movie I've never seen. It sounds terrible. I don't mean to shit on your childhood, but it sounds terrible. All right, so for next time, well, for this weekend rather, you have the proposal due. It's a discussion post. The prompt doesn't quite line up with that. That's okay. It is just a discussion post because I want you guys to see what each other are doing. And I would approach it in this way, right? Like we started to do here. What sets yours apart? If it helps, you don't have to do this. You could like just Google, like, I'm trying to think like journey movies or like quest movies. Because again, it's always about they're supposed to figure it out on the road. Like that's what it is. And then they realize through the journey that like they didn't have to go anywhere because it was here, right? Like that's the story. Almost always. But that biker bar in particular, especially with the guy that shows up, like that sounds like it's going to be just about your entire paper, at least half of it.